I brought you here under false pretenses. This is billed as top 5 threats, top 5 nuclear threats. And it's true, I'm going to talk about the top 5 nuclear threats. But what I really want is your help. What I really want is your intellectual engagement in something that I'm working on, which is trying to define the current strategic moment. What are the trends that are operating? What are the big trends in the world? What are the trends in our field? What are the trends in nuclear policy? And if we analyze this correctly, what can that tell us about our policy opportunities here? What are the kinds of things we might reasonably be able to advance? Or what are the threats we might be able to stop? So I'm going to get to that in the second half. How long do we have? When does this end?
Well, we technically have the room until 10 of 2.
Got it. Okay,
We
so
don't have quite that much time to perform it.
So I will speak for an hour. No, just kidding. I'm gonna run through these, and I hope that what I think I'm gonna have a couple of slides at the end just to help with the list I have in my head of trends, so that you can add to it and help me with this. So let me just go through what I think are the top 5 nuclear threats in the world. And if you get bored, you can go to the Defense One site, where I wrote this up at the end of December, where the 2017 top nuclear threats in the world and how they're going to carry over into 2018. And this is a little different from my normal list. I've been doing this for about 35 years. For about 35 years, I started out like you. I was a graduate student, in this case at Georgetown, studying these issues, and I just moved through the Washington pipelines and from one position to another. But in almost all of those, I'm always doing threat assessments. And this, I'm old school. This is what I think is where you start your strategy. You have to identify the threats. What are the problems you're trying to fix? So in order of bad to worst, the top 5 nuclear threats, as far as I can see, is number 5 is we're in a new nuclear arms race. We are in it. We're not on the brink of it, which is what Bill Perry used to say just a couple of years ago. Now he and I are in complete agreement. We are in it. Every nuclear armed state is building new nuclear weapons. Some are expanding their arsenals, like India and Pakistan and China. Some are replacing Cold War weapons that are reaching the end of their operational life, like the United States and Russia and our NATO partners, Britain and France. But they're all building new weapons. This, of course, has historically been one of the big threats in the world. In the 1980s, it was the threat. In the 1980s, you would say the greatest threat to the world was the US-Soviet nuclear arms race. Well, the arms race is back, and we're in it, and it's number 5 right now, but it could move up. It's growing. The 4th nuclear threat that I see is the increasing willingness to advocate the use of nuclear weapons in battlefield conditions. So the rise of, the re-emergence of tactical nuclear weapons as a weapon of choice for nuclear-armed nations. This has been a concern for us for many years in Pakistan, where we've seen their arsenal go definitely in the direction of proliferation of battlefield nukes for use. For all the reasons that you're familiar with, what that means, you're devolving control down to battlefield commanders, you have increased security risks when you start putting these nuclear weapons in the field during a moment of crisis. And of course, in general, tactical nuclear weapons are in general meant to lower the nuclear threshold. So we've seen it in Pakistan, we've seen it in Russia. Russia may or may not have a policy of using a nuclear weapon first in a conventional battle conflict. It's not clear. When I was on the International Security Advisory Board, I studied this issue. I was convinced that they did have this escalate to de-escalate strategy. Some of my colleagues have been pushing back on that. It's not clear that that is actually their doctrine, but it's in play in Russia. Let's just say that. This notion that you would use a nuclear weapon first if you were losing a conventional conflict is in play. And now in the United States. Today, Secretary Mattis is up with General Silver testified already before the Armed Services Committee on the Nuclear Posture Review. Tactical nuclear weapons are back in a big way in U.S. policy. It's back to the 50s. We haven't seen this much talk about tactical nuclear weapons in decades. We went nuclear nuts in the 50s. We proliferated nuclear weapons for every conceivable purpose. Of course, these were the weapons you had to have. If you were a serious military commander in the 1950s in the United States, you wanted to have nuclear weapons. So we had not just long-range systems, we had nuclear torpedoes, nuclear short-range rockets, nuclear landmines. We even had a nuclear bazooka. My personal favorite nuclear weapon of all time is the Davy Crockett. It fired a sub-kiloton bomb about a half a kilometer. Why anyone would want to fire a nuclear weapon a half a kilometer is beyond me. Even the Army figured that out. They withdrew that weapon in the 60s. But we had them everywhere. And of course, all this ended. During the 70s and 80s, we started eliminating these, but in 1991, with the end of the Cold War, Colin Powell and H.W. Bush, and yes, Dick Cheney, pulled out about 14,000 nuclear weapons from the U.S. arsenal, pulled them out, denuclearized the Army finally, got rid of our nuclear cannons, took the weapons off the surface fleet. A few were left, but even those, they're gone. We got 150 airdrop bombs in NATO. That's pretty much it. But they want to bring them back. The same people who were advocating these weapons then are advocating them now. The same line of thinking that was present in the 50s is present now. This conflict never ends. So that's a dangerous new trend. Threat number 3, the possible collapse of the Iran threat. We have just solved what many people thought was the most important nuclear threat in the world. Whether that was correct or not, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, this was the #1 threat. The talk in Washington wasn't, will we go to war with Iran, but when will we go to war with Iran? When will Israel bomb Iran? When will the US bomb Iran? The Iran deal solved that problem. It rolled back the Iranian nuclear program to a fraction of its former size, froze it in place for a good 15 years, maybe longer, depending on how good we are at diplomacy and what we choose to replace that deal with when some of these provisions start to expire, and then it put it in an iron box with a camera on it. That problem is solved. And for at least 15 years, which in diplomatic time is forever. That is a great victory, and yet it teeters. And yet it teeters. There are ideologues in this administration that want to blow it up. They never liked it. They never wanted to make any deal with the Iranian regime. It wasn't ever about nukes for them. It was always about regime change. So a deal that changes the regime's behavior is not good enough. Never. It's never going to be good enough. There is no fix to this deal that will satisfy them. May 12th, the President of the United States will decide whether to lift sanctions again, waive the sanctions again or not. 50-50. Coin flip on what he does. Unpredictable. You cannot know what the President of the United States will do on any given day, and not on that day. Number 2. The number 2 nuclear threat in the world today is North Korea. By far. It really isn't even close. The threat of the Iran deal is serious, breaking it up, but that would set in motion a chain of events that may or may not result in a nuclear arms race and nuclear weapons in the Middle East years hence. No, North Korea's got nuclear weapons and material enough for 20. As Jeffrey has pointed out for years, oh yeah, they can hit us. Oh yeah. They can hit Tokyo, they can hit Seoul. There's not a doubt in my mind that if we are stupid enough to implement a bloody-nose strike, that will quickly lead to a larger scale conventional conflict, which will inevitably go nuclear. I do not see the fire break. I do not see where or how such a conflict ends. It goes nuke real quick. We can talk about North Korea more. But here's the #1 threat, and here's the really more provocative thing. The #1 threat in the world today is the United States of America. The United States of America is the #1 nuclear threat in the world. We have a President of the United States whose policies make all of those 4 previous threats worse. Everything he is doing is throwing nuclear fuel on the fire. Everywhere. Nuclear arms race, tactical nuclear weapons, Iran deal, North Korea. He's making those problems worse. Plus, you have serious questions about the mental stability of the President of the United States and his unfettered sole authority over the nuclear weapons arsenal of our country. 60% of Americans do not trust the President of the United States to make wise decisions on nuclear weapons. Recent Washington Post poll. Half of the American people think he could start a nuclear war without justification. It's almost a direct wording from the poll question. I've never seen a situation like this. This is, as so many other things are these days, unprecedented. And there are so many unprecedented things happening that we kind of like, it's one of 300 things that have happened in the last couple of months. But it's here, it's real, and it is the most consequential. Whether he does or does not do an interview with Mueller is a serious issue. Whether he wakes up tomorrow and decides he's had enough and calls the officer over and tells him to open up the suitcase and he gives the order and we launch a nuclear weapon in North Korea, that is a far more serious issue. And it's hard for us to see this. I have never put the United States as the #1 threat. It's not because I agreed with Ronald Reagan or H.W. Bush or George W. Bush, or for that matter, Bill Clinton or Barack Obama, although I tended to agree with them more. It's because they objectively were not the problem. The most you could say is in the 1980s, it was the US-Soviet nuclear arms race, but there was two in that tango. Now it's just us. It's not great power conflict. That is not the threat. Yes, that's a condition of our age. Yes, there's tensions rising, but that's not what is driving this moment. It's hard for us to say this. I got trolled relentlessly when I published this article and I put it up on Twitter. 250 attacks like that. How many of them were bots? I don't know. Is there a program for that? Yes? See me after class. I don't know. But so people do not want to hear this. People do not want to hear this. And it's hard for us as analysts to do it. It's like trying to take a picture of the moon when you're on the moon. You don't see yourself. You don't see this. It is not in the Nuclear Posture Review. If you're aware of this analytical problem, read the Nuclear Posture Review again and realize that they leave out the United States. That there's nothing that we are doing that in any way contributes to a threat. There's nothing of any kind. Now, I had a discussion with Joe Perillo about this yesterday. He said, look, we're doing all these good things. The U.S. is also reducing the threat in a number of areas, and I agree with that. We have hundreds of dedicated civil servants working to do export controls and stop the spread of nuclear weapons and maintain the incredible arms control mechanisms that we've built up over the decades. Thousands of people around the world are doing that, and that's good. And the United States is very often in the lead in those efforts. That is a good thing. It's just that the bad things we're doing outweigh those positive aspects. So I want to discuss that particular problem with you today. Am I right about that? Is that a correct assessment? Am I freaking out over Trump? Is my analysis biased by my politics in some way? Or by my disgust with the behavior of the current President of the United States? Am I distorted in some way? Or is this true? And if it's true, we got to start talking like this. We got to start talking like this. When we do our threat assessments, it's got to be like this. It can't be the way the NPR is. There's growing threats in the world today. It's worse than 2010. Really? I don't think it's worse than 2010. That's not my threat assessment, at least unless you roll in the President of the United States. And then you could argue, yes, it is worse. That it isn't the deteriorating security environment. No, that is not what's going on. So that's the challenge. Okay, end of threat assessment part. Let's move to strategy. You with me so far? Is it okay? Strategy. Could I have those slides? One of the reasons Ploughshares Fund hired me in 10 years ago, my anniversary is coming up in a few weeks, was because I was writing about the new moment, the new policy moment we had in nuclear. So in 2007, I started to write about this, and I'm looking at the trend, and I'm analyzing the trends and trying to figure out what is moving, what is going in the direction, what does that mean for our policy options. So this is a slideshow I've been giving for many, many years, and this is a summary of the kinds of things I thought. So in 2007, 2008, we had this the threats were increasing. This is mainly India, Pakistan, Iran, North Korea. These were all crises that were increasing. One trend. Number two, we had the collapse of the neo-Cold War doctrine, the failure of the war in Iraq. This idea that we would reshape the world on the point of our bayonets, that U.S. military should be the lead element in U.S. foreign policy. This was a complete disaster, and it discredited all those, at least momentarily, all those analysts and that way of thinking at the world. So what that meant was there was a policy vacuum there that could be filled by an alternative strategy, and then you had that new strategy presented. And by this I mean the seminal piece of one article. We should live so long to have an article with this much impact. 2007, Wall Street Journal, January 2007, 11 years ago, George Shultz, Henry Kissinger, Bill Perry, Sam Nunn write this article that these Cold Warriors, these people who built the American nuclear empire, are saying it's time to take it down. We have to go eliminate nuclear weapons. And over the course of that year and others, they were joined by spokespeople in other countries, other nuclear armed states, other NATO allies. There was a growing chorus of respected former military, former diplomats who were saying it's time to eliminate nuclear weapons. So we had something, and in the process, we also had elections taking place in key states that brought new leaders to the fore. New leaders to the fore. Where younger leaders, including then Barack Obama, this is even before that, including Barack Obama, who were ready to shape their own legacies. And they were open to these kinds of ideas. So that meant we had a crucial policy window. Could we make the most of it? We had a moment to try to fundamentally transform U.S. nuclear policy, and we failed. Could I figure out how to change that? Thank you very much. Can you just click that for me? So there's only two. There's only two. So if I can get the next one, but see, it's not so easy, is it? So this is really, really tiny, and I know you can't read it because I just did it this morning, and these are just my notes, and I did it to talk with you. Here's my sketch. This is a draft. I'm not ready to go public with this yet, or, go big with this yet. Help me figure out these trends. What am I missing? What are the trends? So I start with a big picture. What's going on in the world? When Richard Haas writes about a world in disarray, what is he looking at? What is he seeing? Well, there's this vast wealth that has been created over the last several decades, and it's gone to the few. So we've had this the economies are growing all over the world. Don't worry about the stock market. Economies are growing all over the world. Tremendous increase in wealth over the last couple of decades to the few. Point number two, there's growing anger from those left behind, which is most of the people in the world are left behind, and they are pissed. And they want change. So what kind of change are they getting? Marxist revolution? Democratic socialism? No, that's not where things are going. There's the rise of a new nationalist militaristic paradigm. That's what we're seeing. 60,000 people carrying torches through Poland in 2017? Really? This is not good. This is not good. Obviously, the Trump election and what that represents. So it has various manifestations, but in general, that's what's happening or you might even say that this is happening in other countries too. I mean, look at China's leadership. The acceptance, the popularity of an authoritarian regime, authoritarian rule. Putin, not as popular as President Xi, but this is a very different paradigm from what we were looking at 10 years ago. And we do have new nuclear threats. There are new challenges. This is what the NPR focuses on this a lot, but we do have these new nuclear threats. That's my list that I just gave you. Other people have different ones, and in North Korea, is the one that freaks people out the most. Ask the people of Hawaii. Ask the people of Hawaii who just went through something so terrifying that it's, if it had happened to California, we'd still be talking about it. But it happened to Hawaii with several 100,000 people rather than tens of millions. But they were scared to death for half an hour over North Korea. They thought it was real. We have the collapse, this is the next trend, the collapse of the nuclear elimination movement. I could call this the Obama moment, but it was never really Obama. It was much broader than that. But that effort failed. We have to acknowledge that. It failed. It didn't work. It didn't, not only didn't it fundamentally change U.S. nuclear policy, not only did it not end Cold War thinking, it didn't cut that many weapons. And it committed to a $1.7 trillion buildup. And that price tag keeps going. We didn't convince our allies to go along with us. Some of the tears that are shed in the NPR over our hopes that this would all work, those people never hoped it would work, are real. Some of those criticisms are real. So that failed. That moment failed, and that left people discouraged, disillusioned, open to the charge that it's all idealism. See, you people. You people. This is not, as you can see, it's not directly connected. So that's sort of the progressive failure, retreat of the U.S. from global leadership. We have never, since World War II, had a president of the United States who did not see himself as the leader of the West. We do now. We have a president who sees NATO as economic rivals, not as strategic partners. He begrudgingly goes through the motions on partnership. So we have this retreat of the U.S. all over the world, but it's particularly sharp in Europe, which is why I have a separate board on that, the widening gap between the U.S. and Europe. And you see it in Merkel's statements. Today, the West German Foreign Ministry denounced the U.S. nuclear posture review. Today. Has that ever happened? Our NATO allies, those who are protected by our so-called extended deterrence, usually just genuflect. Maybe they grumble as they bend the knee, but they bend the knee. Something is happening. Something is different now. It's in motion, but it's very real, and it could develop very rapidly. Coming up, almost linked to that, is the rise of the new mass movements. How many of you were in the Women's March this year? Last year? Oh, come on, people! Really? Okay. So, what's the problem? Well, then you missed. You missed out. Because that is one of the most stirring mass movements, one of the most stirring movements I've seen in my lifetime. It is inspiring, and what I saw at this march this year was it was dominated by young women. Young women are just streaming into this. Something profound is happening. Can it be sustained? I don't know. Movements come and go. I've been in lots of them. Civil rights, anti-war, nuclear elimination. They come and go. This one's still rising. And it's coupled with other mass movements that are rising up. And some of that is affecting our field. Who just won the Nobel Peace Prize? Some old man? No! I can. A mass movement. These people who are outsiders. You know, it took us at Ploughshares a while to warm up to these folks. Who are they? They're not us. Who are these people? What do they think they're going to do? You do what? You can't get a treaty. Damn. Got a treaty, got a Nobel Peace Prize. They are the leading edge of the anti-nuclear movement at this point. We started funding them 2 years ago, just barely catching the wave. Almost missed it. It is significant. I was at Oslo. It was an incredibly moving experience. You should read the speech given by Berit Reiss Anderson, the woman who headed the Nobel Prize Committee. It was a fantastic takedown of the nuclear deterrence theory. This wasn't some idealistic oratory. This was detailed, strategic thinking, like Pope Francis, just attacking the morality of nuclear deterrence, attacking the security benefits of nuclear deterrence, attacking the humanitarian consequences of nuclear deterrence. Powerful stuff. So this is a movement to watch. This is something to see. How are we relating to that? What are we doing about that? Do we just think it's happening all by itself? We don't have to theoretically discuss this? I look at all these and I think we're heading for a crisis. I'm a little influenced by what people are saying about Wall Street today. About this is a tremor that's happened now. And it's going to be okay, the markets are going to recover. They're recovering a little bit today, but an earthquake is coming. There's fundamental problems in the market. That's how I feel about the nuclear order. There were fundamental problems in the nuclear order. So I think a crisis is coming. A crisis is coming. Is there an opportunity for us? I don't know. I'll tell you what our strategic frame is at Ploughshares now. It's very simple. Stop the worst from happening. Build the world we want to see. We're not talking about advancing a bold new nuclear policy. We don't see the opportunity for that in this administration or with this Congress. So we're in defensive mode. Stop the worst from happening. And in the process, develop the policies that you want to see when a policy moment opens up again. You know, I mean, how often do you have to hear the Chinese character for crisis is? I don't even know if that's true. All the time. Jeffrey? No, it's not true. Say, but it contains the opportunity in the character. But it is true. In every crisis, there is a policy opportunity. What's ours here? And in order to understand this, we have to understand these trends and see what ways people are going. Because it's not just about publishing a clever op-ed or having a really, really, really good idea. It's understanding where the currents of history are going and seeing how you can ride those to seize the opportunity. Thank you very much for letting me rant about this for 40 minutes. Now, if you don't mind, I really would like your ideas, your input, your thoughts on the threats and on the strategic trends.